So how'd you end up in Siberia?
I'll try to keep it a little bit short on the how. But the long story short was I had a brother that's adopted, and when he grew up, he wanted to find his biological mom and just tell her thanks.
Yeah.
And so he did. And when he was probably 20 or something, he found his biological mom, told her thanks. Turns out he had a brother that was going to go over to Russia and help build this orphanage, and that brother was about my age.
Mhm.
I mean, I remember at that time I read this verse that said, if you're in the darkness and see no light, just continue following me, basically. I was like, okay, I'm going to take that to the bank, even though I don't know if it's true or not. And then the only glimpse of like light I got in all that was when I heard about that orphanage, to go build that orphanage. And I prayed about it, and I felt, and I can't explain, like it brought me to tears. I felt so strongly that I should go. And so I was like, well, that's a clear call. I'm just going to do it. Yes, I just bought a ticket, got a visa for a year, and then I went and helped build an orphanage. And we got that built. And but he was an American, and I wanted to live with Russians to learn the language. And so he sent me to a neighboring village to live with a couple Russian families that needed a hand, somebody to watch their kids and cut their hay and milk the cow and all that. So I found myself in that little Russian village, just getting to know these two guys and their families. It was pretty fascinating, and of course I didn't know the language yet, and they were two awesome dudes. Both of them had been in prison and met each other in prison, and like we're really close because they had like found God in prison together, and stayed to get got out and stayed connected. And so I'd bounce back between those two families, and they used to always tell me about their third buddy they'd been in prison with, who was a native fur trapper now in the north. And so they'd always, you got to go meet our buddy up north. And one day that guy came through to sell furs in the city, and he like invited me to come live with him. And my visa was about to expire, but I was like, when I come back, I'll come. And so I went back home, earned some more money, did some construction or whatever, then went back and headed north to hang out with Yura and fur trap, and that started a whole new, opened a whole new world that I didn't know about.
Before we talk about Euro and fur trapping, let's actually rewind. And would you describe that moment when you were in the darkness as a crisis of faith?
Yeah, for sure. It was like it was darkness in that I didn't know how to parse, what is this thing that's my faith, and what's the wheat and what's the chaff, and how do I get through it? And I basically just clung to keeping it really simple. And oddly enough, in my Christian path, God was actually defined in a certain, God is love, and I was just like, that's the only thing I'm gonna cling to, and I'm gonna try to express that in my life in whichever way I can, and just trust that if I do that, if I act like I've heard this lately, but if you just act like you believe, over time that world kind of opens to you. When I said I would go to Russia, I prayed, and I was like, Lord, I don't see you, I don't know, but I got this, what I felt like was a clear call. I have only one request, and that is that you would give me the faith to match my action. I'm choosing to believe. Like I could choose not to, because whatever, but I'm going to choose to act, and I just asked to have faith someday. And then honestly, for the whole first year I went through, and that was a very crazy time for me, learning the language, being isolated, being misunderstood, blah, blah. But then trying to approach all that with a loving, open heart. And then I came back and I realized that prayer had kind of been answered. That wasn't the end of my journey, but I was like, whoa, that was like my deepest request that I could come up with. And somehow that had been answered.
So through that year, you were just like, first of all, you couldn't speak the language. That's really tough. It's really tough.
Because it's unlike on a loan because not only can you not speak and you feel isolated, but you're also misunderstood all the time. So you seem like an idiot and all that. And so that was tough. I felt very alone at that time, at certain times in that journey.
But you were sort of radiating like you said, lead with love. So you were radiating this kind of camaraderie, this compassion for
I was
humanity.
really intentional about trying to about that. That was I don't know why I'm here. I just know that that's my call is to love one another. And so I would just try to and then it meant digging people's wells. It might mean just going and visiting that old lady babushka up at the house that's lonely. And that was really cool. I got to talk to some fascinating ladies and stuff. And then go to that village, help those families. I'm gonna be like cut the hay, be the hardest worker I can be because that's my goal here. I didn't have any other agenda or anything except to try to live a life of love, and I couldn't define it beyond that.
What was it like learning the Russian language?
It was super interesting. I think I had the thought while I was learning it, one, that it was way too hard. Like if I would have just learned Spanish or German, I would be so much farther. But here I am a year in, and I'm like, how do you say I want cheese properly?
Yeah.
And then, but at the same time, it was really cool to learn a language that I thought in a lot of ways was richer than English. It's a very rich language. I remember there was a comedy act in Russian, but he was saying, one word you can't have in English is "не допил," meaning like I didn't drink enough to get drunk, but that type thing. But it's just you can make up these words using different prefixes and suffixes, and like blend them in a way that is quite unique and interesting, and honestly would be really good for poetry because it also doesn't have sentence structure in the same way English does. The words can be jumbled in a way,
and somehow in the process of jumbling, some humor, some musicality comes out. It's interesting. Like you can be witty in Russian much easier than you can in English. Like witty and funny, and also with poetry, you can say profound things by messing with words and the order of words, which is hilarious because you had a great conversation with Joe Rogan, and on that program, you talked about how to say "I love you" in Russian, which is hilarious. And it was for me the first time. I don't know why. You were a great person to articulate the flexibility and the power of the Russian language. That's really interesting because you were saying like "Я люблю тебя," "Я тебя люблю," "Тебя я люблю," "Тебя люблю я." You could say every single order, every single combination of ordering of those words has the same meaning, but slightly different.
You could and it would change the meaning if you took "ya" out and just said "lublю тебя."
Yeah,
there's like a different emphasis, or maybe "я тебя люблю" or something. All these different,
or just "Тебя люблю" also.
Right, exactly. So it is rich, and it was interesting coming from an English context and getting a glimpse of that, and then wondering about all those Russian authors that we all appreciate. That we actually aren't getting the full deal here.
Oh yeah, definitely. I've recently become a fan, actually, of Larissa Volkansky and Richard Prevere. They're these world famous translators of Russian literature: Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, Pushkin, Bulgakov, Pasternak. They've helped me understand just how much of an art form translation really is.
Some authors do that are more translatable than others. Like Dostoevsky is more translatable, but then you can still spend a week on one sentence.
Oh yeah.
Like just how do I exactly capture this very important sentence? But I think what's more powerful is not like literature, but conversation, which is one of the reasons I've been carrying and feeling the responsibility of having conversations with Russian speakers, because I can still see the music of it. I can still see the wit of it. And in conversation comes out like really interesting kinds of wisdom. When I listen to like world leaders that speak Russian and I see the translation and it loses the irony, like in between the words. If you translate them literally, you lose the reference in there to the history of the peoples.
Yeah, for sure. And I've definitely seen that on and if you listen to, I think it probably was a Putin speech or something, and you just see that, oh wow, something major is being lost in translation. You can actually see it happen. I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't the case with the that whole greatest tragedy is the fall of the Soviet Union. I hear him being quoted as saying all the time. I bet you there's something in there that's being lost in translation that is interesting.
I think the thing I see the most lost in translation is the humor.
Mm-hmm. I'll just say that was the hardest. That was tangibly the hardest part about learning the language, is that humor comes last, and you have to wait. You have to wait that whole year, or however long it takes you to learn the language to be able to start getting the humor. Some of it comes through, but you miss so much nuance, and that was really difficult in interaction with people to just be the guys. When there's humor going on and you're totally oblivious to it.
Yeah, everybody's laughing and you're like, trying to laugh along. What did they make of you?
To be honest,
this person that came from descended upon us, all full of love.
If I had a nickel for every time I heard oh, Americans suck, but you're a good American. You're the only good American I've ever met. But then, of course, they never met.
Yeah, exactly. You're the only one.
but I think because I was I tried to work hard, tried to be more useful than I was a drain, all that. I think it was pretty appreciated me out there. I've definitely heard that a lot, so that's nice.
Can you talk about their way of life? So when you're doing fur trapping.
Fur trapping was an interesting experience. You basically what you do in October or something, you'll go out to a hunting cabin, and you'll have 3 hunting cabins. You'll go, you stock them with noodles or whatever it is, and then for the next couple months or however long, you'll go from one cabin. Usually the guys are just out there doing this on their own, so they'll go out and they'll go from one cabin, and each cabin will have 5 or 6 trap lines going out of it. Every day it'll take a half a day to walk to the end of your trap line, open all the traps, and a half a day to get back. And they'll do that. They'll spend a week at a cabin, open up all the traps, and then it'll take a day to hike over to the other cabin, go to that one, open up all those traps, and then 3 weeks later or so, they'll end up back at the first cabin and then check all the traps. And so it's kind of that rhythm, and they'll do that for a few months during the winter. And you're trapping sable. They're called sable, like pine marten is what we would have the equivalent of over here. And
what is it?
It's like a weasel, a furry little weasel, and they make coats out of it. And so when I went, he showed me how to open the trap, showed me the ropes, gave me a topographical map. There's one cabin, there's the other, and we parted ways for 5 weeks. We did run into each other once in the middle there at a cabin, but other than that, you're just off by yourself, hoping to shoot a grouse or something to add to your noodles and make your meal better, or catch a fish, and then working really hard, trying not to get lost and stuff.
How do you get from one trapping location to the next?
That's funny, because it was basically by landmarks and feel. I didn't have a compass and things like that. So
by feel. Okay.
I got myself into trouble once, and the first time I went to one cabin, I got myself into trouble. First time I went to the other cabin, I nailed it. And so I had 2 different experiences on my first trip. But the one that I nailed it, I remember I had to go, and it's like a day hike. I was like, well, I know the cabin's south. And so if I just walk south, the sun should be on the left in the morning and right in front of me in the middle of the day. And by evening, it should end up at my right, and just kind of guess what time it is and follow along. And it, it takes all day. And I kid you not, I ended up 100 yards from the cabin. I was like, whoa, this is the trail, and that's the cabin. Oh, amazing. And then the other time I went out, and I was heading over the mountains, and I thought, hours had passed. I probably had gotten slightly lost. And then I thought I was halfway there. So I thought, okay, I'm going to sit down and cook some food, get a drink. I'm thirsty. So I sat down and went to start a fire, and my matches had gotten all wet because the snow had fallen on me and soaked me, and I didn't have them wrapped in plastic. I was like, oh no, I can't drink water, so I was like, well, I'm just going to power through. I'm halfway there. Well, I kept hiking, and then I realized it was getting night, and then I realized I was at the halfway point because I saw this rock that I was like, oh no, that's the halfway point. I was like, I can't do this, and so I need to go get water. I ended up having to divert down the mountain and head to the water. I ended up, it was a whole ordeal. I had to take my skis off because I was going through an old forest fire burn, so they were all really close trees, but then the snow was this deep, so I was just trudging through, and just wishing a bear would eat me, get it over with. But I finally made it down to the water, chopped a hole through the ice, was able to take a sip.
So you're severely dehydrated,
And
exhausted,
cold, like, you feel sort of nervous. You're in over your head. And then I got down to the river, chopped a hole, nice, drank it, hiked up the river, and eventually got to the other cabin. It was probably 3 a.m. or something.
So you chopped a hole in the ice to drink.
Get some water. Yeah,
This got to be like one of the worst days of your life.
It was a bad day for sure. I've had a few, but it was a bad day. And here's what was funny is I got to the cabin at like 3 a.m, and I should have brushed over a lot of the misery that I had felt. And I laid down. I was about to go to sleep, and then Europe charges in from the other way. I was like, "Whoa, dude, Europe, what are you doing?" And I was like, "How's it going?" He's like, "Oh, it sucks." And he laid down and just fell asleep. I fell asleep, and I was like, "Oh, that's funny. The last few weeks that we've been apart, who knows what he went through? Who knows why he was there at that time at night?" All just summarized, and it sucked. And we went to sleep, and the next morning we parted ways, and who knows what happened.
And you didn't really tell him.
Never knew. Neither of us said what happened. It's just like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and he probably was through similar kinds of things.
Who knows? Yeah.
Like, what gave you strength in those hours when you're, just going to waist high snow?
Yeah.
All of that. You're laughing, but like that's hard.
Yeah. You know that Russian phrase, "Глаза боятся, руки делают"?
Eyes are afraid, hands do. I'm sure there's a poetic way to translate that.
Right. It's kind of like, just put one foot in front of the other. When you think about what you have to do, it's really intimidating. But you just know, if I just do it, if I just keep trudging, eventually I'll get there. And pretty soon you realize, oh, I've covered a couple kilometers. And so when you're really in it in those moments, I guess you're just putting your head down and getting through.
I've had similar moments. There's wisdom to that. Like just take it one step at a time.
One step at a time. I think that a lot, honestly. I tell myself that a lot when I'm about to do something really hard. Just, one step at a time. Just going to don't like sit there and think, oh, that's a long ways.
Yeah.
Just go. And then you'll look back and you covered a bunch of ground.
One of the things I've realized that was helpful in the jungle, that was one of the biggest realizations for me, is like, it really sucks right now. But when I look back at the end of the day, I won't really remember exactly how much it sucked. I'll have a vague notion of it sucking, and I'll remember the good things. So being dehydrated, I'll remember drinking water. And I won't really remember the hours of feeling like shit.
That's absolutely true. It's so funny how just awareness of that, having been through it and then being aware of it, means next time you face it, you can be like, you know what? Once this is over, I'm going to look back on it. And it's going to be like that and nothing. And I'll actually laugh about it and think it's the thing I'll remember. I remember that story of that miserable day going down to the ice. And I can smile about it now. And now that I know that, I can be in a miserable position and realize that that's what the outcome will be once it's over. It's just going to be a story.
If you survive, though.
If you survive, and that can be.
So you mentioned you've learned about hunger during these times. Like, when was the hungriest you've gotten?
It was the first time. So to continue the story slightly, I went for trapping with that guy, and then it turned out all his cousins were these native nomadic reindeer herders. And after I earned his trust and he liked me a lot, he took me out to his cousins who were all these, nomads living in teepees. I was like, this is awesome. I didn't even know people still lived like this. And they were really open and welcoming because their cousin just brought me out there, and vouched for me. But it was during fencing season, and fencing in Siberia for those reindeer is like an incredible thing. You take an axe, you go out and you just build these 30-kilometer loop fences with just logs interlocking. It's tons of work. And all these guys are more efficient bodies. They're better at it. And I'm just working less efficiently and also a lot bigger dude. But we're all just on the same rations kind of. And I got down. That was 155 pounds, getting down pretty dang skinny for my 6'3" frame, and just working really hard. And in the spring in Siberia, there's not much to forage. In the fall you can have pine nuts and this and that, but in the spring you're just stuck with whatever random food you've got. And so That's where I lost the most weight and felt the most hungry, and I had a lot of other issues. You know, I was new to that type of work, and so working as hard as I could, but also making mistakes, chopping myself with the axe, and getting injured, all kinds of stuff. You know,
so injuries plus very low calorie intake.
Low, yep.
And exhausted.
I remember if you were this poor son of a gun to get stuck slicing the bread, you know, like you're here cutting the bread and somebody throws all the spoons and drops the pot of soup there. And it's like before you can even done slicing your slice, all the meat's like poof, gone from the bowl. Everybody else has grabbed the spoon in midair and poof. And you're just like, hoping this one little noodle's going to give me a lot of nourishment.
Wow. So everybody gets, I mean, first come, first serve, I guess.
Because it's like all the dudes out there working on the fence.